Tony Stark is being escorted by a military convoy as he crosses the Afghan desert. He jokes with the soldiers, flirts with the driver, and even one of them asks for a photo. But without any warning, a missile destroys the vehicle in front. The soldiers get out to protect him, but one by one they are eliminated, leaving Stark to fend for himself. He tries to escape, but a missile strikes him, embedding shrapnel in his chest and leaving him unconscious. As if that weren't bad enough, when he wakes up he realizes he has been kidnapped by a radical group. To understand why they did this, we need to know who Tony Stark is. This brilliant and uniquely minded man is the son of a famous weapons designer. From a very young age, he showed remarkable talent for technology. At age 4 he built a motherboard, at 6 he constructed his first engine, and he graduated from the best universities in the world before he turned 18. However, after his father suddenly passed away, Stark took over leadership of Stark Industries and continued his father's legacy, creating more powerful, lethal, and destructive weapons, revolutionizing the arms industry and turning him into a celebrity. Now, all of this is being projected during a ceremony celebrating Stark, a celebration he did not attend. Why? Because in reality Tony is not what he appears to be. Yes, the genius weapons creator part is true, but he is also an eccentric, wealthy playboy who enjoys ostentatious parties, luxury cars, and first-class mansions. He loves women and generating sexual tension, but above all he craves attention. This last point is so pronounced in him that Tony can be classified as narcissistic, but I will come back to that later. This becomes clear in an interaction he has with a reporter. She tries to interview him, but Tony responds in a sarcastic and acidic manner thanks to his way with words. Moreover, that same night he even beds her. One of the most reliable and crucial people in Tony's life is Pepper Potts, his personal assistant at Stark Industries. She is an executive in a very important role and skillfully manages most of the administrative and managerial responsibilities for Tony, literally keeping the company running even when Tony neglects it for long periods. In one instance, Pepper interrupts him to inform him that he is late for a flight and also reveals that today is his birthday, something Tony had completely forgotten, since he is so self-absorbed that he doesn't give much importance to anyone else's personal life. He rushes in his supercar to catch his private jet, and when he arrives, instead of apologizing to the officer for being 3 hours late, he simply shows his arrogance and acts as if nothing happened, forgetting his assistant's birthday and showing no concern about making the officer wait. We can see high levels of narcissism in Tony. We also observe his lack of empathy for others and an inflated sense of self-image, as he believes his life, activities, and time are more important than everyone else's. It is important to note that Tony exhibits high levels of narcissism, but this does not necessarily mean he has a personality disorder. He does have a sense of superiority, struggles to be empathetic, and craves admiration, but unlike those with a full-blown narcissistic disorder, Tony does not manipulate others for his own benefit and is capable of forming meaningful relationships. He steps off his plane, greets the general, and presents the latest Stark Industries development, the Jericho, a missile with enormous military power, capable of splitting into multiple units and destroying everything in its path. The presentation is a resounding success, and Tony calls his partner and friend, Stein, to tell him that the deal is closed. He then climbs back into the convoy. And now we come to the beginning of our story. The convoy is attacked, Tony is kidnapped, and he wakes up in some sort of cavern. He tries to move, but cables attached to his body hold him in place. He notices a strange smell on his chest and, as he removes his bandages, he discovers something horrifying. A metallic device is embedded in the middle of his chest. This device is the work of his colleague, Jinan, a brilliant engineer and physicist who has just saved Stark's life and who has also been captured. Jinan extracted as much shrapnel as possible from him and then created an electromagnet which he placed in the middle of his chest, preventing the remaining shrapnel in his body from reaching his heart. Jinan explains that they are being held captive in a heavily guarded cave by a radical group. The men who kidnapped Tony inform him that they captured him because they want him to recreate the very missile, the Jericho, that he just fired. To accomplish this, Tony is violently forced and taken outside, where they show him the arsenal of weapons that this group has acquired. However, this is no ordinary arsenal. Every single weapon belongs to Stark Industries, missiles and explosives from Tony's own company. In essence, he is witnessing the consequences of his legacy. This, along with his capture, is a wake-up call, a traumatic event. The rebels tell him that if he builds the missile, he will earn his freedom. Although Tony knows they are lying to him, if he resists, the remaining shrapnel in his chest will kill him in less than a week. So, with death as his only certainty, he agrees to build the weapon. Together with Jinan, he gets to work. However, as we all know, Tony is not really constructing the missile he was ordered to build. Instead, he is designing the supersuit with which they will escape. First, he develops a small arc reactor that will prevent the shrapnel from reaching his heart and will also serve as an immense power source for the supersuit they are about to create. As the days go by, Jinan and Tony grow increasingly close emotionally. The big day arrives, and Jinan fits Tony with the newly created Stark armor, and the battle for freedom begins. Tony eliminates every enemy that confronts him, but Jinan is not as lucky. He is riddled with bullets by the rebels and loses a lot of blood before Tony's eyes, who is helpless as he watches his friend exhale his final breath. His friend leaves him with some parting words, "Don't waste your life." And with that, Jinan passes away. Later, Stark manages to escape from the caves, destroys his own weapons, and flees the area. He now finds himself alone, without food or water, hospitable place. Eventually, however, he is found by a group of soldiers, including his friend James, and is taken back to the United States, where the only person truly waiting for him is Pepper. It may seem like she could go unnoticed, but in reality it is deeply revealing. I didn't mention this before, but aside from managing Stark Industries, Pepper is one of the few people who genuinely cares about Tony, not because of business interests or because he's a superstar or because she might gain something, but simply because he is Tony, something he doesn't always appreciate. Shortly after, Tony goes to a conference where he declares that after what he has experienced, he will shut down the weapons department. The journalists, Pepper, and Stark himself are in shock at the thought of all his money being threatened. Stark's partner tries to convince him not to take that decision, but he won't budge. The next day, Tony asks Pepper for help to change the reactor he built in the caves. After removing it, the girl asks her boss if he wants to keep the old device, but he says he'd rather have it incinerated. Tony decides to start working on a second suit, but this time not for military use, but for a more personal one. In fact, when he is about to start, he exclaims, "Don't let this fall into the wrong hands. Perhaps in mine, it can do good." Now we see a Tony with a completely different mission and vision. At first, we saw him cancel the production of his company's weapons, and now he is creating technology with the idea of doing something different. As many have guessed, this change in Tony, like in any human being, often arises from a traumatic experience. In this case, his capture and everything he saw while being held captive. A traumatic event can radically change a person's perception of their own safety and the world around them. For example, after a robbery, a person might see the world as inherently dangerous. In Tony's case, being kidnapped revealed to him the consequences of his own weapons and how they almost killed him. This is an emotionally intense experience, one that forces him to re-evaluate what he is doing with his life. That is why he decides to cancel the weapons department and instead manufacture armor capable of protecting him. Traumatic events like this will happen again later and will continue to shape Tony's perspective on the world and on himself. He spends entire nights and days in his workshop perfecting the new suit. Although at first he suffers many injuries, thanks to his intelligence and perseverance he manages to create a fully functional suit. However, at this point a problem arises. The terrorists are plotting to reconstruct the suit, this time under the orders of none other than Stein himself, who is about to betray Tony. Days later, Tony receives a small gift from his assistant. It is the old reactor he created to keep him alive, but it has a legend written on it, proof that Tony Stark has a heart. Later, Tony attends a charity event that his company has organized annually. During this event, two important things happen. First, Tony sees his assistant from afar in a very seductive dress, so he approaches her to dance. He flirts with her for a while, and when they step outside for some fresh air, they lean in for a kiss. However, just as they are about to kiss, she stops. Pepper, aware of Tony's reputation with women and not wanting to be seen as just another conquest, especially given that they have a professional relationship, decides to put an end to it right there, demonstrating that there is definitely tension between them. The second important event is when a girl shows Tony some photographs that shock him. They depict a village massacred by the terrorists, who used weapons from Tony's company to commit these atrocities. This deeply affects Stark, who insists that he did not approve of such actions. The woman responds that it was indeed his company that did it, to which Tony replies, "Well, I am not my company." This phrase demonstrates a complete rejection of the idea that Stark Industries is who he is. While looking at the devastated village, the direct result of the weapons his company created, he decides it's time to take action. He dons the full suit and flies to the village where dozens of civilians are being slaughtered. There, he frees everyone from the terrorists' clutches and, incidentally, shreds into pieces the very weapons his company had sold to them. Once home, as Tony removes the suit, Pepper is horrified to discover that Tony's body has bullet wounds from the suit, an alarming sight. Tony then asks her to help him hack a computer in his office. However, perhaps for the first time, she refuses. He explains that he wants the information so he can destroy all of his weapons and do good in the world, but Pepper says, "Tony, you're going to kill yourself, and I don't want to be part of this." Clearly, between the two there is nothing overtly romantic, but having spent so much time together they have developed a strong emotional bond. This makes Pepper's sense of responsibility toward Tony go beyond mere professional duty. Her affection and care for her boss make the idea of contributing to something that could hurt him utterly unbearable. Helping him move forward with his plan means accepting the possibility of his death, something she cannot accept. Tony doesn't understand. She has supported him for many years, even when he profited from destruction, and now that he wants to do good she refuses. Tony explains that he feels the only reason he survived is because he has a mission, and for the first time in his life he feels he knows what he must do in his heart. He knows it's the right thing, and he declares that it's only this mission, and that's it. He has no plans afterward. Pepper sighs, and convinced by his words she decides to help him, though not before reminding him, "You are everything I have here." I pause to analyze Tony's words. He himself declares that he is only planning to finish this mission and has no future plan for his suit. He does not intend to use it for any future good for others. His only objective right now is to atone for the damage he directly witnessed after being kidnapped and seeing how his weapons hurt innocents. However, this action is motivated more by a need to correct his own visible mistake than by a general commitment to doing good. Remember this short-sighted vision that Tony has, because it will be important later. Meanwhile, we are shown something shocking. Tony's own partner orchestrated his capture and the murder of Stark in order to take over the company. Stein steals the blueprints for the first armor from the leader of the group, kills him, and returns to his country to build his own suit. Stein goes to Tony's home, temporarily paralyzes him, and removes the reactor that keeps him alive in order to install it in his new suit, which is finally finished. With his remaining strength, Tony finds the reactor that Pepper had given him and places it back, saving his life. Now more stable, he dons his suit and goes out to defeat Stein. At the same time, Pepper finds herself in the same location where Stein begins to execute his evil plan. When the man is about to finish her off, Tony arrives to save her life, initiating the final battle. After many blows and near-death experiences, Tony, with a little help from Pepper, manages to make the reactor explode, ending Stein. Days later, everyone talks about that metallic suit that some saw the day the reactor exploded, something like an Ironman, or, in English, Iron Man. Tony has to go out and issue some false statements to the press to calm things down. Agent Coulson gives him some cards and tells him to stick strictly to them. This agent had been helping Tony and Pepper throughout the story, as he is interested in having Tony join an initiative called SHIELD, but we'll get to that later. Before leaving, Tony jokes with Pepper about the idea of being Iron Man. He goes out to face the press and reads the very papers that declare he was rescued by a bodyguard in the suit, at which point a reporter interrupts him, saying that it's a very opportune coincidence for it to be real. Tony defends himself, but listen very carefully to his response, because it is extremely revealing. He says, "There's a difference between doubting the official story and making unfounded accusations that I'm a superhero." The reporter then tells him that she never said he was a superhero. Realizing her error, Tony is left speechless. At that moment, Tony has just experienced something in psychoanalysis known as a Freudian slip. This is an act that manifests a different, even contradictory, expression to the conscious intention of a person. A slip can appear in an action, gesture, or, in Tony's case, in his speech. By saying making unfounded accusations that I'm a superhero, he reveals an internal desire to be seen and recognized as a superhero. But it seems that beyond wanting to be seen as a superhero, there is a deep hunger for recognition and attention in general. He doesn't really want to be a hero, he just wants to be perceived and admired as one. A trait that feeds his marked narcissism because it makes him feel even more important. This slip in his speech is not so much a mistake as it is a window into his internal desires and conflicts. Tony's ego can't take it any longer, and instead of reading the papers, he stops for a moment and says, "The truth is, I'm Iron Man," which makes the press go wild with surprise. It is true that Tony did act heroically, dismantling the terrorist group and freeing the village, but as I mentioned earlier, it seems that more than a heroic act, this was Tony cleansing his conscience. In less than a year, the idea that Tony does everything for recognition is perfectly demonstrated. We see Tony arriving at his company's exposition as if he were a superstar. It's like a concert with dancing lights and him in the center. It seems that rather than an expo about the company, it's a tribute to himself. On the other hand, Tony is questioned before the Senate. The government wants to acquire the technology of the armor because it could threaten national security if it isn't under state control. Tony mocks the Senate and explains that it will be another 10 years before others have this technology. Then he declares that thanks to him and his creation, the world has never experienced as much peace, sending greetings to the senators' mothers. He puts on a show and declares before the cameras, "I will serve this nation as I see fit." Here we can analyze an important aspect related to Tony's narcissistic traits, a sense of superiority even over the government of the world's most powerful nation. This sense of superiority results in Tony's inability to accept help and work in a team, and soon you will see why it is necessary to understand that, for now, Tony is not well at all, and by extension, neither is his company. Tony's health is extremely delicate because the palladium, the element that powers his small reactor, is slowly poisoning his body. The problem is that he can't fix it because there is not yet any element in the world that can substitute for it. So his death is almost certain, a fact he is well aware of. Consequently, Tony has adopted a desperate and indifferent attitude. Few things matter to him now. He drinks more than ever and puts himself in risky situations constantly because he has lost hope of finding a solution and feels his time is running out. This despair and confrontation with his mortality lead him to seek distractions and intense experiences, as his perception of life has become fleeting. To make matters worse, Tony refuses to ask for help, and because of all this he has neglected his company, something that infuriates Pepper, since she ends up solving all the problems Tony causes just so she can have some peace of mind, and because she knows she is brilliant. Suddenly, Tony names her director of all Stark Industries, a move that makes her very happy. Tony did this so that he wouldn't be bothered anymore, but also for another key reason, because he knows that if he doesn't find a substitute for the palladium, he could die at any moment. After that, Tony meets Pepper's new assistant, Natalie, who for some reason is very skilled in combat. And so the three travel to a Formula One race where, in an impulsive act, Tony decides to compete. The problem is that during the race, a man enters the event and starts wrecking cars with his electric whips. Fortunately, after a complicated fight, Iron Man neutralizes the criminal, who is taken to prison. The man behind all this is named Banco. He is the son of Anton Banco, a Russian scientist who once collaborated with Howard Stark, Tony's father. Anton and Howard worked together on the arc reactor technology, but Anton was deported and discredited, dying in poverty. This led Ivan, Banco's father's son, to harbor deep resentment towards the Starks and seek revenge. Banco is extremely intelligent. He was even able to recreate Tony's reactor and used it to power his whips. Tony visits Banco in prison, where this sinister man tells him, "You come from a family of thieves and butchers. Now, like any guilty man, you want to rewrite your own story and forget all the lives that the Stark family has destroyed." Words that weigh heavily on Tony, because deep down he knows they are true. At this point, Justin Hammer, the CEO of the rival company to Stark Industries, enters the picture. He has always been jealous of Tony's great inventions, and for that reason Hammer releases Banco from prison and offers him resources and funding to develop a new line of combat suits. Banco accepts, and together they begin working on this technology. However, this assistance is only a facade, as Banco's intentions are much more sinister. We also meet James Rhodes, a military officer, the liaison between Stark Industries and the armed forces, and also a great friend of Tony. The problem is that he is often in the difficult position of balancing his loyalty to Tony with his military duties. Rhodes comes to speak with Tony about a security matter, but he notices that Tony is slowly being poisoned by his reactor. Rhodes worries about him and tries to make him see that he doesn't need to be alone to do good, but Tony stubbornly refuses any kind of help. At night, Tony organizes a celebration for his birthday. However, he ends up getting extremely drunk and uses his suit irresponsibly. He dons it just so the guests can see him and fires energy recklessly, endangering everyone at the event. Fed up with all this, Rhodes puts on another of Tony's suits, chases everyone from the party, and starts a fierce battle with him to stop him. Remember, Rhodes is in the military, and although Tony is one of his best friends, he understands that Iron Man's technology is extremely dangerous if used irresponsibly. He believes that the army can handle the suit more safely than Tony in his current state. So after stopping him, he takes the suit to the military base with the intention of putting this technology into responsible hands. Despite what it might seem, Tony doesn't show a violent or angry reaction when Rhodes takes the suit. He simply resigns. Tony is exhausted and overwhelmed by his health condition and the external and internal pressures. His emotional state is so low that he just doesn't have the energy to fight. Then a man arrives to see Tony, Nick Fury, the leader of S.H.I.E.L.D., an organization dedicated to maintaining world security and handling superhuman threats. Nick Fury is interested in Tony Stark as a potential member of the Avengers. He knows that Tony's technology and intelligence could help the team. However, he is also aware of Tony's personal, professional, and health problems, and wants to assess if Tony is ready to take on a greater responsibility. To that end, Fury gives him a briefcase containing videos of his father, information that might help solve his problem. Tony confesses that his father never showed him affection and made him feel almost hated. However, Fury reveals that his father was his partner and one of the founders of S.H.I.E.L.D., so he knew perfectly well that he did care about Tony. This leaves Stark very intrigued. Watching the tapes of his father, he discovers a very important message. Tony, you are too young to understand this, but I want to tell you that I built this for you. Today, I am limited by the technology of my time, but when you solve it, you will change the world. I want you to know that you will always be my greatest creation. For so long, Tony had grown up thinking that his father saw him as nothing more than a burden or disappointment, but after hearing this, he realizes that Howard loved him and had great faith in him, and not only that, he also reveals that everything he built was with Tony in mind. This leaves Tony with a mission and, above all, a legacy. It's a reality check, as he realizes he has a responsibility greater than just saving his own life. Inspired by these words, Tony goes to Pepper's office, who is still extremely upset with him. Tony brings her some strawberries, but she scolds him, saying, "This is the one thing in the world I'm allergic to." Maybe Tony didn't choose the right gift, but at least he knew there was a connection between Pepper and strawberries, which is progress. Pepper sends him off in a huff, but Tony sees his father's old model and takes it to his laboratory to digitize it. In it, he discovers a kind of map for a new element, and after days of work he finally manages to synthesize a new power source that won't poison him. Once he finishes, he says to his late father, "You taught me 20 years ago and you're still teaching me. Thank you, Dad." This moment is important because it leaves Tony with a fundamental lesson, that he needs others. In a way, Pepper had already demonstrated that when she took over the management of Stark Industries. But this time, someone else has just given him the cure for not dying from poisoning. It shows that although Tony is a genius, he couldn't have achieved this without the help and legacy of his father. This change becomes even more significant considering that Tony only accepts this need for help after a near-death experience. Once again, such experiences have deeply impacted him because they put into perspective what truly matters and remind him of his own vulnerability. Meanwhile, the technological exposition begins, and with it, Bunko's evil plan. He created the robots that Hammer requested, but modified so that they obey his orders. Iron Man arrives at the location where his friend Rhodes is with the suit, but chaos erupts as the robots controlled by Bunko try to kill Tony. Rhodes joins the fight, but he is knocked out. One by one, the robots come to destroy Tony. He approaches his friend and says, "Rhodes, wake up, I need you." That phrase clearly shows that Tony has accepted he needs others in order to be himself. He has learned to trust the abilities of those around him. He manages to get up and, after a long battle, and especially thanks to Rhodes helping together, by working as a team, they defeat Bunko. In the end, Tony rescues Pepper from some explosions, and they end up on top of a building where, now calmer, Tony thanks her for taking care of him in such a difficult moment. Immediately afterward, Pepper resigns from being CEO, since it's too stressful a life. So, since she no longer works for Tony, they come close and finally share a passionate kiss, expressing everything they had kept inside and officially beginning their romantic relationship. This is fundamental, because overcoming one's narcissism is key to achieving love, and we will come to understand this fully later. Days later, Nick Fury arrives with Tony to make him a proposal. This is where Tony's newfound ability to accept help and work in a team becomes even more significant, since Nick Fury is interested in having Tony join the Avengers. For now he will serve as a consultant, but soon he will have an even more proactive role with them. Shortly after all of this, S.H.I.E.L.D.'s facilities have been experimenting with the Tesseract, a cube that promises to be an infinite energy source. Moreover, Nick Fury and his team see it as a tool that can help develop technologies to protect Earth from extraterrestrial threats. The problem is that this cube is also one of the Infinity Gems, the same gem that an alien race called the Chitauri is searching for. Well, actually they are being sought by an even more villainous man, but it's not time to get into that yet. The Infinity Gems are a series of artifacts which, when combined, give the bearer absolute power over the universe, but for now, we won't dwell on that. The point is that the leader of the Chitauri has just given Loki a scepter containing the Mind Gem so that he can go steal the Tesseract and, in the process, take revenge on his brother Thor by subjugating Earth and its inhabitants to demonstrate the power he can exert. Loki opens a portal to S.H.I.E.L.D.'s facilities, where he steals the Tesseract and takes control of Clint and a physicist who is very knowledgeable about this artifact. Nick Fury and his team try to stop him, but despite their efforts, Loki manages to escape. Fury is aware that this poses a gigantic threat to all of humanity, so he declares war knowing it won't be an easy battle and gathers the most brilliant men and women for the mission. Among them are Clint Barton, though for now his mind is being controlled by Loki, Steve Rogers, also known as Captain America, Natasha Romanoff, Black Widow, Bruce Banner, better known as the Hulk, and finally Tony Stark. At this point, Tony has a strong and loving relationship with Pepper and has even managed to build the most technologically advanced tower in the city, the Stark Tower, which is also a monument to his name and legacy. This is clearly seen, as his surname is emblazoned in giant, shining letters for all to see. Tony is being sought by Agent Coulson, who needs to inform him about what has happened. Tony really doesn't want to go, but since Pepper is asking him and Agent Coulson truly needs him, he agrees. Coulson is also a huge fan of Captain America, he even has collectible cards of him, but he keeps his opinions to himself. Our heroes must hurry, because Loki has already set up a clandestine lab in order for the Tesseract to provide enough energy to keep open the huge portal through which the extraterrestrial army will enter and conquer the planet. They all board the SHIELD helicarrier, and the search for Loki begins. Thanks to tracking systems, they locate him and send Captain America after him. The fierce battle begins, with Natasha and Tony Stark joining in, who with one blow manages to stop Loki, which is quite strange considering he is such a powerful enemy. However, just when they are about to take him to a safer place for interrogation, Thor falls from the sky and takes his brother away, trying to persuade him to stop his revenge. At that moment, Iron Man appears and initiates a battle against Thor. This doesn't last long, however, as Steve steps in to stop it. Once the fighting subsides, Loki is locked in a maximum security cell on the ship, and Tony and Bruce study the scepter with the mind gem. The team then begins working and planning what to do to find the third artifact. But here is when things start to get complicated. A strong tension between Steve and Tony begins to emerge due to their different ways of thinking and plans of action. Tony sees Steve as an obedient, old-fashioned soldier, out of touch with modern reality. He believes Steve is too rigid and unwilling to question authority, whereas Steve sees Tony as a selfish, arrogant billionaire who doesn't understand sacrifice and responsibility. Steve distrusts Tony's motivation and commitment to the common cause. The tension between them is so high that, in a fit of anger, Steve tells Tony, "You only fight for yourself, stop pretending to be the hero." Remember that phrase well, because it will be very important. These tensions spread among the rest of the team, eventually provoking arguments. They hurl insults, reveal personal details, and Tony keeps making ironic jokes and putting himself above the rest of the Avengers, even above Nick Fury himself, since, as we've seen throughout the story, Tony constantly tends to challenge authority. Recall that he first challenged his own partner and the entire board of his company when he shut down the weapons department, then he mocked the entire government by refusing to hand over his technology and even confronted the military, and now he is acting arrogantly before Nick Fury, the man who brought them all together to defend Earth from an intergalactic threat. All of this is thanks to Tony's inflated self-image. Karen Harney was a German psychoanalyst who theorized that neurosis is a defense strategy people develop to manage anxiety and insecurity. One of the key concepts in her theory is the inflated self-image, where a person develops an exaggerated and grandiose perception of themselves as a defense mechanism against feelings of insecurity and fear. Some arrogant individuals with high levels of narcissism, like Stark, believe they have special rights and a superior status due to their self-image, and this behavior can manifest in how they treat others and respond to figures of authority. Now, if this inflated image comes from feelings of insecurity, where do these feelings come from? Well, like many people, they may stem from parental relationships. Howard Stark was often absent due to his work, leaving Tony without a present father figure for much of his childhood, which could have created an emotional void and a sense of abandonment. This lack of attention and validation may have made young Stark feel that something was wrong with him, that he was being abandoned, which probably contributed to Tony's insecurities, constantly striving to prove his worth. As we saw in the tape of Tony's father, Howard was demanding with the boy. It seems Tony grew up trying to win his father's approval, but he also developed a rebellious attitude because he never felt valued enough. This dynamic might have instilled in him a tendency to reject any figure attempting to exert authority over him. All of this could partly explain his constant challenges to authority and the source of his inflated self-image, a point made clear when, amid the escalating tensions, Captain America asks Tony, "You think you're great with the armor, but without the suit, who are you?" This is a direct attack on Tony as a person, to which Tony replies, "A genius is billionaire, playboy, philanthropist and egocentric response that inflates his image to cover his vulnerability." While all these arguments take place, Natasha approaches Loki to interrogate him, and thanks to her skills she manages to make him reveal his plan. His goal was to turn the Avengers against each other by provoking distrust and internal fights. Moreover, Loki knew that if he could enrage Hulk, the giant might lose control and cause massive destruction within the helicarrier, weakening the team and destabilizing their base from the inside. This is represented by a shot where the scepter with the mind gem moves from resting on the table to being over the team, who cannot stop arguing, symbolizing that he now controls them. At that moment, Clint arrives and causes a huge explosion on the ship that destroys a rotor and sows chaos. Bruce loses control, transforms into the Hulk, and tries to kill Natasha, destroying everything in his path. Meanwhile, Tony and Steve put aside their differences and join forces to repair the broken rotor and prevent the ship from crashing. At the same time, Loki manages to escape from his cell and, in its place, locks the ship's elevator. Another casualty is Hulk, who is forced out of the ship when he tries to destroy a fighter jet. At the last moment, Natasha manages to free Clint from Loki's mental control. In the end, Stark manages to save the ship from plummeting into the void even though Loki leaves devastation in his wake and escapes, thus setting in motion his plan to open the portal and bring an army that will conquer the entire planet. The wound Loki inflicted on Coulson was devastating. Before dying, the agent resigns and exclaims, "Alright, this was never going to work if we didn't have something," and before he can finish his sentence, he loses his life. It seems that if Coulson had even one more second, he would have said, "If we didn't have something to avenge." Nick Fury picks up the little boy's blood-stained collectible cards and throws them onto the table, a gesture that hits Tony and Steve hard. Fury comments that when he created the Avengers Initiative, he envisioned uniting a group of extraordinary people in the hope that together they could become something greater than themselves and fight united. Coulson died believing in that idea, in the idea of heroes. Upon hearing the word heroes, Tony stands up and leaves the room. At this point, Coulson's death changes everything, for Tony as well as for the rest of the team. Tony has a personal connection with Coulson. Coulson was the link between Tony and S.H.I.E.L.D., and even though Tony often shows an indifferent or sarcastic attitude towards him, there is respect and even affection for this noble agent. Now that Coulson has died, not directly because of Tony, but in a way Tony feels responsible since his own arrogance and conflicts with the other Avengers partly contributed to the tragedy. It is as if Tony is once again witnessing up close the consequences of his actions, just as he saw the impact his weapons had during his own kidnapping. Until that moment, the team was fractured by their differences and personal conflicts, but Coulson's death has ended that. Now they have something to avenge, but this goes beyond Coulson as an individual. Coulson becomes a symbol. His death shows the Avengers that lives are at stake and that they must act together decisively to protect the world. For Tony, in particular, it represents the person he loves, Pepper. Later, they will fully understand why, with this new motivation, the heroes rise up, take up arms, and set out to stop Loki. Meanwhile, Tony returns to his great, shining tower, once Stark Tower, where Loki has already opened the portal. The fierce battle begins. It is brutal, with material and human losses like never before, yet all the Avengers arrive and put their strength, sweat, and blood into stopping the Chitauri and saving as many human lives as possible. But now they are working and fighting side by side as a true team, united by a cause far greater than their individual interests, something bigger than their mere existence as individuals. Although they managed to slow down the attack for a while, it is useless if they don't close the portal, because hordes of enemies continue to pour out. Destroying it is not an option, as it is shielded by pure energy that renders it impenetrable. Hulk manages to give Loki a beating, leaving him out of commission, while Natasha arrives with the physicist who finally snaps out of Loki's control and reveals that using Loki's scepter, he can close the portal. But before he can do so, Tony orders him to stop because the council has decided to send a nuclear bomb to the city to annihilate the enemies, which would also kill countless civilians. Tony doesn't want to close the portal that way because he has an idea. He has a deeply moving plan that tells us much about his transformation. He intends to carry the nuclear bomb on his own shoulders and launch it into the portal to save the millions of human lives in the city while also destroying the Chitauri army. The problem is that this is likely a one-way trip. Tony takes the bomb and, before doing so, calls the most important person in his life Pepper. This act, as human as love itself, is the clearest demonstration that Tony has changed. Eric Fromm, in his book The Art of Loving, states that the fundamental condition for achieving love is the overcoming of one's own narcissism. In a narcissistic orientation, we only consider what we feel and think within ourselves as real. The things that happen outside are only seen in terms of whether they are useful, dangerous, or what we can gain from them. The opposite of narcissism is objectivity, the ability to see people and things as they really are. In this same line, one of the hallmarks of true love is the capacity to give without expecting anything in return. This is only possible when we overcome our narcissism, which makes us focus solely on what we can get out of a relationship. Initially, Tony was solely focused on himself and his own interests, but throughout his journey, and largely thanks to his relationship with Pepper and those around him, he learns to value and love others for who they are. His final call is not born out of selfish need or to ask for something, but out of true love for Pepper and for others, a complete overcoming of his narcissism, which is essentially about giving without expecting anything in return. Even if it means giving up his own life, Tony is about to enter the portal, uncertain if he will return, and he uses his final seconds to listen for Pepper's voice, but the person he loves most in the world does not answer. Finally, Tony enters the portal, places the nuclear bomb among the enemy army, and it begins to destroy the entire force. Tony, aware of what is happening, falls from space toward the portal itself, which he luckily manages to traverse before it closes, surviving in the process. They have finally won the war. Remember when Steve told Tony, "You only fight for yourself, stop pretending to be the hero"? There are many definitions of a hero, but they mostly converge on one idea. A hero is someone who puts the welfare of others above his own. And it seems that now Tony has truly become one, fighting for the safety of the planet. He takes the third artifact back to his world along with Loki, and each Avenger continues on their own path. In the final shot, we see Tony's building, once emblazoned with the name Stark, but now only a single letter remains, the initial of Avengers. This is highly symbolic. Initially, the building with the Stark name represented Tony's ego. His surname in huge, bright letters was a representation of his individual identity and personal success. In this sense, the change from Stark to A indicates that Tony has accepted that there are causes more important than himself. He is now part of a mission greater than his own, protecting the world together with other heroes. This is all from my end. I'm aware that Tony will go through many more things, but how his story continues depends on you. If you'd like me to continue and make a series chronicling Tony's evolution all the way to Endgame, leave a like and a comment. If I see that this video gets a lot of support, we will continue working on the complete saga. Until the end, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.